Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be reviewing Sleeping in Traffic Part 1 by no other than the band Beardfish.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
I don't know if you know this, but I've been waiting for this episode for so long. This is probably my most anticipated album on the series so far, maybe only followed by the album by Pope Francis, but that's about it. Yes, we have an album by Pope Francis later on in the series. Yeah, you should go check it out. Anyway, here's some of my favorite bits from this album.
This town, day and night after big late bill. Some say it's gone, but I think it's still here.
So let's start our review today with asking this simple question. How did this album that did not exist on the original list made it on here? And well, you might remember that back in episode 75 I reviewed Sleeping in Traffic Part 2 by Beardfish, and well, that album I loved so much. I actually loved it so much that it skyrocketed to my #1 place of the entire albums that I listened to this year, and well, it's still holding that spot. But the thing is that while I love that one, I knew that there was always one album that might dethrone it in a way, and that could only be his older brother, of course being Sleeping in Traffic Part 1. But the thing is, that album actually didn't make it to the list this year. So when in the middle of the series the opportunity arose to actually add 10 new albums onto the list, I knew that I had to give the decision out to you guys because you definitely deserved it. But I actually chose one myself in spite of the fact that no one even voted for it in the first place, and that album of course was the album we're reviewing today, Sleeping in Traffic Part 1 by Beardfish. And yeah, here we are today, listening to an album which I've been honestly counting down the days until we get to listen to it. And you might remember that from episode 75 when I reviewed Part 2, I was dressed in this like odd sort of costume, so I thought to myself, you know what, why not continue this trend of odd costumes, so I'm gonna switch into something more comfortable. Yeah, that'll do it. And there's actually one thing that I noticed when I looked at the two last albums I did about Beardfish, and that's the fact that I've neglected giving you the basic overview of this band's history. So let's compensate on that right now, and I'll tell you a bit about this very interesting band. So interestingly enough, there's really not a lot I can say about Beardfish, seeing as there's not a lot of information about them online, and what there is to be found is mostly just repeating itself from other sites. But as a whole, Beardfish was founded in Gävle in Sweden in 2001 by no other than pianist, guitarist, and singer-songwriter Rickard Soblom, as well as his friend David Zackerson. And the two would be joined by Gabriel Olsen and Peter Diamant on the bass and drums respectively, before leaving and being replaced by Magnus Åsgren on the drums and Robert Hansen on the bass. And a later addition to the band was actually Stefan Ronson, who played the guitar, the keyboards, and most importantly unfortunately the flute. Now I know that all these names can get confusing, so the bottom line is that now the band is comprised of 5 members, and together they would go out and create their debut album released in 2003 called From a Place You Can't See, and that's of course a translation from Swedish. But after releasing that album, Aronson would actually leave the band, leaving them a 4-man group, which would actually turn out to be the last and final incarnation of Beardfish for the years to come. And in 2006, Beardfish would come out with their second studio album, this time called The Same Day, and afterwards they would be approached by the Inside Out record label to sign a publishing contract with them, which they would accept, and ultimately led this album to get copyrighted by the YouTube copyright system. And in 2007, the band would come out with their most ambitious project to date, making a double album that would be released separately, which is also a concept album, with both albums being representatives of different times of the day cycle, with part 1 being the day and part 2 being the night. And just to quickly cap off this entire story of Beardfish, the band would go on to release yet another 4 albums, as well as of course the second part of Sleeping in Traffic, and in their later albums they would even dabble more and more into progressive metal, which is something interesting that I've yet to hear from them, so I'll be happy to go ahead and check these albums out maybe next year. But in 2015, most of the band's members started having families and having kids of their own, so on the 11th of July 2016, the band would go out with an official statement on their website stating the fact that they have officially and unfortunately broken up. Now, as of making this video, Beardfish are unfortunately still broken up, but know that when they eventually do reunite for something, I'm gonna be there because I'm so excited to see these guys live, and I'm honestly so sad I never got to know them when I got into prog at the beginning. Nevertheless, let's talk about today's album and how it fares when compared to its second part. So Sleeping in Traffic Part 1, at least to me, feels like a lot of subject material that would later on go to morph and materialize into what would become Sleeping in Traffic Part 2. Unlike a lot of two-parters, they don't feel like you can actually play them interchangeably and not notice a thing. These 2 albums have definitely a change in quality, with the first part being lesser to the second. The sound, the quality, and the tone of the 2 albums are basically very much different from one another, though I would state that the base materials of their creation are quite the same. This one of course still contains the charming vocals by Rickard Soblum, as well as of course having the very strong musicianship from each and every member involved in the creation of this entire album, as well as this one also being quite experimental, especially when it comes down to creating stuff with very odd sounding instruments and somehow managing to give them pretty proper context when seen in the context of this entire album. But when it comes down to it, I do believe that part 1 of Sleeping in Traffic shows that there's a lot to be learned by this new band. And well, we do see that on part 2 when they've actually been able to hone in on all of their musical directions and where they wanted their music to be taken in, and actually work with that to create something bigger than life. Yes, part 2 of Sleeping in Traffic is definitely the eclectic album, and it goes in many different explorative ways, but the thing is, it does feel like one continuous and very fluid album, as opposed to part 1, which is also very exploring in many different ways, but it just feels like an amalgamation of many tiny parts put in together in not the best form. And I do believe that one of the most critical characteristics of any Beardfish album, and I've also heard this one on 4626 Comfort Zone, was the fact that they have to find a balance between the vocals and the instrumentation, which on part 2 of Sleeping in Traffic is found perfectly, and that's why they could have made a long epic of 36 minutes and make it sound really good and continuous and actually be replayable, as opposed to this album, which kind of loses that balance and puts more emphasis on the vocals rather than the instrumentation, which Beardfish can so well create. Nevertheless, I do believe that there are a lot of tracks on this album which I don't really see myself coming to anytime soon, and that's always not a good sign. Nevertheless, there are certain tracks on this one which I do believe to be very good, with them being Sunrise, which is a lovely track, as well as Roulette, which is a very eclectic piece of lovely modern prog, and my personal favorite being The Ungodly Slob. But as a side note of personal observation, I do believe that While Sleeping in Traffic Part 2 represented the night, and it felt very much like that because of the themes and the way that the darker themes were being put across in the composition. This album is supposed to represent day, but I really didn't hear that. It, to me at least, felt a lot like a second nighttime in a sense. There was nothing bright about it in many different points of the album. The topics themselves didn't feel like they were occurring during the day, and I do believe that it's harder to actually characterize the daytime as opposed to the nighttime, but if they tried doing so, they didn't quite succeed. But yeah, all in all, this album wasn't as much of a letdown as it was more of an explanation. Up until today, I knew Sleeping in Traffic Part 2 as this perfect album that just came out of nowhere and went into oblivion, when I know that Beardfish hasn't created something better than it later on. But well, now that I know Part 1, I get where stuff are coming from. There are so many references in this Part 1 that are revisited and even elaborated upon in Part 2. There's so many things that were started but not fully understood in the Part 1, which of course, as I said, understood in Part 2. So now I just know how great of an album this second part is, as of course compared to the first part. But boy, it's getting hot in here. This is Blanket. I'm gonna take the blanket off, and honestly I think we need some change of pace, so let's talk about this album's cover. So Beardfish have this thing of just generating bad looking covers. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's to balance out the stellar music that they know how to create. But yeah, nevertheless, I do like this painting to some extent. It of course looks like something that a child would paint, but I'm not entirely sure if it was in fact made by a child, although it is very convincing in the way that it looks. I think that it's overall a pretty nice drawing, and one of the nicest things we get out of this one is actually the representation of the band's mascot being the Beardfish himself, which of course unfortunately gets yet another representation in the photo which they added to the post that declared the breakup of the band in 2016. But yeah, all in all, I do believe that it's some sort of a lame cover, but it just kind of looks good because it's lame. I don't know what I'm talking about. So as much as it tears my heart, I do believe that I have to give this one the objective rating of 7 out of 10. But that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're going to be listening to The Story of I by Patrick Moraz. I of course want to thank my lovely supporters over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay Wan, Rist of Kings, and Lindsay Haycox. You guys are just the best, and if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my About page. But that's about it, guys. Have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye, guys.